The greenhouse key felt cold in my palm that March morning, heavier than it should have been for something so small. I'd avoided that building for 2 years, watched it through the kitchen window like a snow globe I couldn't bear to shake. But Miguel, our gardener, had just said something that made my heart race in a way I hadn't felt since the hospital. Your wife planted something in the greenhouse before she passed. She made me promise, don't let him open it alone. Bring Sophia. I stood there, coffee forgotten on the counter, staring at Eleanor's handwriting on the envelope he'd handed me. The loops and curves were hers, careful, intentional, like everything she did. She'd been gone 24 months, but somehow she'd planned for this exact morning. Miguel's weathered hands trembled slightly as he set the envelope on the table. Between us, she made me wait exactly 2 years to tell you, Mr. Daniel. Said the timing had to be right. Through the window, the greenhouse caught the early sun, glass panels glowing like a lantern I'd refused to enter. Inside, I knew her orchids had long since died. I'd paid Miguel to maintain the property, but I'd specifically told him to leave. That structure alone, let it gather dust. Let the plants return to soil. I couldn't bear to see what remained of Eleanor's final months in that earth. Bring Sophia, Miguel repeated, his accent thickening the way it did when emotion pressed against his words. Your wife said you need her there, both of you together. My daughter's name landed like a stone in still water. 8 months since our last conversation and argument about selling the house that ended with her hanging up. 2 years since she'd actually been home. Miguel's eyes held something I couldn't quite read. Knowledge, maybe. Sadness, certainly. The kind of look that said this wasn't a request I could decline. He left the envelope on the kitchen table and let himself out through the side door, the same path he'd taken for 15 years of Wednesday mornings. I stood alone with Eleanor's handwriting staring up at me. The envelope remained sealed. My phone sat on the counter, Sophia's contact information just 3 taps away. I pulled up her number, my thumb hovering over the call button, but I couldn't make myself press it. Not yet. Not until I understood what Eleanor had done and why she'd needed both of us to see it. I met Eleanor 34 years ago at a botanical garden charity event in late April. She was the fundraising director, moving through the crowd with a clipboard and a smile that could convince millionaires to sponsor rare ferns. I was the young architect who'd donated design work for their new conservatory tax write-off. Professional visibility, the practical reasons, I told myself. But really, I'd done it because I'd visited the old conservatory once and been stunned by the light. She found me studying the structural bones of the original greenhouse, mentally redesigning the framework. You're the architect, she said, not a question. Do you always look at buildings like you're trying to solve them? Only the broken ones, I replied. Good, she said. That's what I need. Someone who sees what needs fixing. We were married 10 months later. Our life together was built on complementary strengths. My precision and her spontaneity, my structures and her gardens. Where I drew straight lines, she planted curves. Where I calculated load-bearing capacity, she cultivated beauty that served no function except joy. 10 years into our marriage, Eleanor designed the greenhouse herself. A 20 by 30 foot Victorian-style structure with copper finials and glass panels. She'd selected 4 specific light diffusion properties. I handled the engineering, but the vision was entirely hers. She filled it with rare orchids, hybrids, and what she called memory plants, species connected to important moments in our lives. A jasmine from our honeymoon in Charleston. A bonsai maple from the park where I'd proposed. A climbing rose from the hospital garden where Sophia was born. Sophia, God, she loved that greenhouse. I can still see her, at 5 years old, standing on a step stool beside Eleanor, both of them with dirt under their nails and matching expressions of concentration. Eleanor teaching her Latin plant names like bedtime stories, Phalaenopsis, Epidendrum, Cymbidium. At 12, Sophia was pressing flowers between wax paper, creating elaborate botanical journals with meticulous labels. At 16, she and Eleanor spent entire weekends in there, talking in low voices, punctuated by laughter, sharing secrets I was never invited into. I told myself it didn't bother me. They had their world. I had mine. The fracture came 5 years ago. Sophia was in her 3rd year of architecture school, my alma mater, following what I'd foolishly called the family legacy. Then she came home for Thanksgiving and announced she was transferring to study environmental science and sustainable design. I can still hear my own voice, tight with disappointment. "You're abandoning everything we've built." "No, Dad," she'd said quietly, "I'm building something different." Eleanor supported her immediately. Of course she did. The argument that followed created a 3-way rift that never fully healed. Sophia transferred. I attended her graduation with a forced smile. We spoke around the wound, never about it. Then, 3 years ago, Eleanor was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. 18 months of treatment, followed surgery, chemotherapy, hope, decline. I threw myself into work, designing a medical research center, as if creating the right building could somehow fight back against cellular chaos. Eleanor spent her final healthy months in the greenhouse, tending plants with the focused attention of someone creating a legacy. 2 weeks before she died, weakened but still clear-eyed, she asked me to promise I'd tend what she'd planted. I said yes while reviewing blueprints at her bedside, assuming she meant metaphorically our marriage, our memories, the garden of our life together. I was half listening, already mentally calculating structural loads for the research center's atrium. That moment haunts me more than her final breath. After the funeral, I worked obsessively on projects I didn't need for financial reasons. The house became immaculate, but lifeless sides systematically erased Eleanor's presence to avoid the pain of encountering it. Her reading chair went to storage, her books to boxes, her coffee mug to the back of the cabinet. I maintained the grounds meticulously, but I paid Miguel to handle the greenhouse. I couldn't bear to enter it. Sophia moved to Portland. We exchanged strained phone calls on holidays, talking about weather and her work, never about the greenhouse or the mother-shaped absence in both our lives. 8 months ago, I'd suggested selling the house. "It's too much space for one person," I'd said, practical as always. Sophia had hung up mid-sentence. We hadn't spoken since. Now I stood in the kitchen, Eleanor's envelope on the table, the memory of her hands in soil suddenly vivid. I remembered her explaining how certain bulbs need cold darkness before they can bloom. "Patience isn't passive, Daniel," she'd said. "It's preparation for transformation." The letter remained unopened. My phone remained untouched. I realized, standing there in the cold March light, that I couldn't do this alone. Whatever Eleanor had planted in that greenhouse, she'd designed it to require both of us. And that meant I had to face Sophia first. I called Sophia that afternoon. My thumb hovered over her name for 3 full minutes before I pressed it. The phone rang 4 times, long enough for me to consider hanging up before she answered. "Dad." Her voice was cautious, questioning. "We didn't do spontaneous calls, Sophia. I cleared my throat, suddenly uncertain how to begin. "Miguel came by this morning. He said your mother planted something in the greenhouse before she died. He said I shouldn't open it alone, that I need to bring you." The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. "Sophia, I'm here." Her voice had changed, softened into something I couldn't quite identify. "Mom told me about this 2 years ago, before I didn't think you'd actually call. The words hit like a physical blow. You knew. She made me promise to wait, said you'd reach out when you were ready. There was no accusation in her tone, just statement of fact that somehow made it worse. Eleanor hadn't trusted me to include Sophia myself. She'd built that requirement into whatever she'd planned, knowing I'd need the structure, the external obligation. The realization cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I don't know if I'm ready to come back there, Dad. Sophia's voice was small, younger than her 28 years. That house, the greenhouse, ... It's a lot. Something defensive rose in my chest, the old armor clicking into place. I can handle it alone if you're not comfortable. I just thought, since Miguel said, that's exactly why Mom said you needed me there. Her words came faster now, heated. You always handle things alone. You handled her dying alone, working on that research center while she was in hospice. You've handled the last 2 years alone, erasing her from the house like she was never there. I drove by last Christmas, Dad. I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes looking at those perfect hedges and that empty house, and I couldn't make myself knock because I knew what I'd find. Nothing, no trace of her, just you handling it. The truth of it sat in my throat like a stone. You're right, she went quiet. You're right, I repeated, forcing the words out. I can't do this alone. I don't want to do this alone. Please, Sophia, come home, just for the weekend. Help me understand what your mother was trying to tell us. I heard her breathing on the other end of the line, the small catch that meant she was crying. Okay. I can be there Friday evening. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table. For a long time, Miguel returned an hour later, let himself in without knocking the way he always did. She's coming, I told him. He nodded, unsurprised, and sat down across from me. Mr. Daniel, there's something else you should know. Mrs. Eleanor, she asked me to plant specific things at specific times over these 2 years. I've been following her instructions exactly. Some plants are ready now. Others won't bloom for another year, maybe longer. What kind of plants? Different kinds. She left me a calendar, very detailed. When to plant, when to water, when to cover for frost. She said it was a garden that needed both of you to understand it. He paused, his weathered face thoughtful. She knew what she was doing, making you wait, making you call Sophia yourself. The timing, it matters for plants. It matters for people too. 3 days until Friday. I spent them in a kind of frantic restoration. Walking through the house, I saw it through Sophia's eyes, immaculate, cold, empty. A hotel, not a home. I'd erased Eleanor so thoroughly that even her ghost couldn't find its way back. I pulled her reading chair from storage, positioned it by the window where she used to sit with her gardening journals. I retrieved photo albums from boxes in the garage, arranged them on the coffee table. Her favorite books, poetry, botanical encyclopedias, novels with broken spines from multiple readings, returned to the shelves. Her coffee mug, the one with the chipped handle she'd refused to replace, went back in the cabinet at eye level. Thursday night, searching for something else, I opened Eleanor's jewelry box. Beneath her wedding ring, which I couldn't bear to move, I found the greenhouse key attached to a small metal tag. Her handwriting, slightly shaky from the illness, but still readable when the morning glories climb. I looked out the kitchen window. In the March darkness, I could just make out the greenhouse's silhouette, and there, barely visible, vines. Climbing the frame's eastern side, morning glories. I'd been so busy avoiding that building, I hadn't noticed them growing. My hands shook as I dusted photo frames that night. 2 years of avoided grief pressed against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. What had been growing unseen all this time? What had Eleanor known about timing that I'd been too blind to see? Friday evening, I waited by the window. Headlights turned into the driveway at 6:43. Sophia emerged from her Gardner. Then I remembered, older, her mother's cheekbones catching the porch light. She wore a green jacket Eleanor had given her years ago. We embraced awkwardly on the front step, my arms uncertain of where to rest, hers stiff around my shoulders. She felt fragile, or maybe I did. "You kept Mom's chair," she said, seeing it through the doorway. "I put it back this week. I'd stored everything." She nodded, understanding too much. She was carrying a backpack and a manila folder, the edges worn soft with handling. "Mom gave this to me before she died," Sophia said, holding up the folder. "I wasn't supposed to open it until today, until we were both here." Saturday morning arrived, cold and bright. We stood before the greenhouse. Daniel, Sophia, and Miguel, 3 people bound by one woman's vision. The morning glories had climbed the eastern frame exactly as Eleanor's tag had promised, their purple blooms opening to the sun like small declarations. Miguel unlocked the door with a key from his own ring. The hinges creaked, releasing 2 years of sealed air. The scent hit us immediately, earth, bloom, and something else I couldn't name. Memory, maybe. The particular smell of Eleanor's hands. After an afternoon of planting, inside, the greenhouse had been transformed. Where Eleanor once kept experimental orchids in organized chaos, there was now a carefully planned progression of plants, each bed marked with small copper plates bearing dates and coordinates. It looked like a botanical map, a living archive, designed with the precision of an architect and the heart of a gardener. "She planned all this," Sophia whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Miguel walked us through Eleanor's system. Section 1, near the entrance, held forget-me-nots and rosemary, both symbols of remembrance. The copper plate read day 1, year 1. They'd been planted 24 months ago, timed to bloom in early spring, exactly when we'd enter together. Section 2, along the east wall, featured the climbing jasmine from our honeymoon, but at its base, nestled among the roots, were sealed glass jars. Inside each jar, I could see rolled paper, letters, Eleanor's handwriting visible through the glass. Section 3, the center table, where Eleanor used to pot seedlings, now held a single bonsai maple, the species from the park where I'd proposed 34 years ago. Miguel had been tending it carefully. The tiny spring leaves were just unfurling, impossibly delicate. Section 4, the west wall, held empty beds, but on the workbench sat a wooden box containing seed packets, each labeled with future dates, year 3, year 5, year 10. Sophia knelt beside the jasmine and carefully lifted the first jar. Her hands trembled as she unscrewed the lid and pulled out the letter. Eleanor's handwriting, steady and clear, written before the illness had weakened her hands. "Read it out loud," I said. My voice came out rougher than intended. Sophia unrolled the paper and began, "My darlings, if you're reading this together, I'm already proud of you. Daniel, you're probably wondering why I made this so complicated. Sophia, you're probably wondering why I didn't just tell you everything. The answer is the same. Some things can't be rushed. Gardens teach us that time isn't our enemy, it's our collaborator. Seeds need darkness before light, roots need depth before height, and hearts need space before they can grow back together." I felt something break open in my chest. Sophia's voice wavered but continued. "I've planted you a garden that will bloom across years. Some of it you'll see today. Some of it you won't see for a decade. Trust the timing. Trust each other. And trust that love doesn't end, just changes form becomes soil for new growth. We sat there in silence for a long moment. Then Sophia reached for the second jar. Letter 2, nestled beneath the jasmine roots, was about the night Sophia was born. Eleanor wrote about her fear that my workaholism would make me miss our daughter's childhood. But she also wrote about her pride in how I'd carved out time teaching Sophia to draft blueprints on weekend mornings. The two of us hunched over graph paper at the kitchen table while Eleanor made pancakes. I'd forgotten that, Sophia said, softly. Those Saturday mornings, you taught me how to draw elevations. You were 7, I said. You insisted on using my professional pencils. Letter 3 was tied to the bonsai with green twine. It recounted our engagement, my careful planning, the ring I'd saved for 6 months to buy, the speech I'd rehearsed, and Eleanor's impulsive yes before I'd finished the first sentence. Your differences made us strong, she'd written. Daniel built the framework. I filled it with life. Neither works without the other. Then came letter 4. The painful one. Eleanor addressed the fight about Sophia's career change directly. She wrote about her sadness at being caught between us, her understanding of both perspectives. But then I chose Sophia's autonomy because I raised her to build her own structures, not inherit yours, Daniel. You taught her to think like an architect. I taught her to grow like a garden. She's doing both, just not in the way you expected. Let her. I wept then, first tears since the funeral. They came suddenly, unexpectedly, 2 years of held grief. Finally breaking through, Sophia's hand found mine, her fingers squeezing tight. Miguel, who'd been standing quietly by the door, spoke. Mrs. Eleanor gave me very detailed instructions, a calendar for every month, tasks for each plant. She told me when to reveal the letters, according to seasonal blooming. She made me promise to wait until specific conditions were met before contacting you. He paused. She gave me seeds to plant each year for the next decade, for my own garden at home. She said grief is like composting. You can't rush decomposition, but you can prepare the soil for what comes next. We sat on the greenhouse floor, Sophia and I, surrounded by Eleanor's living words. We read each letter aloud, passing them back and forth. With each one, I felt something shift, not healing exactly, but the beginning of it. The preparation of soil. Eleanor hadn't planted something in the greenhouse. She'd planted a multi-year healing process, designed with the same care she'd given her rarest orchids. Sophia opened the seed box for future years. The packets were labeled with instructions that made us both smile through tears. Year 3, plant when Sophia has something to celebrate. Year 5, plant when Daniel has learned to rest. Year 10, plant together, whatever you choose. As afternoon light filtered through glass and leaves, creating patterns on the floor we used to study as a family, Miguel brought sandwiches from the house. We ate in the greenhouse, something we hadn't done since Sophia was a teenager. Asterisk. The conversation turned to the empty beds, the future plantings, what we might choose for year 10. For the first time in 5 years, we were planning forward together. Saturday evening settled over the greenhouse like a held breath. We'd spent the entire day reading Eleanor's letters, each one peeling back layers of time and misunderstanding. Now, as shadows lengthened across the growing beds, Miguel stood and walked to the bonsai maple at the center table. There's one more, he said quietly. Mrs. Eleanor told me this was the most important one, the reason for all the others. Hidden behind the bonsai was a larger vessel we hadn't noticed, sealed terrarium about the size of a shoebox, containing a single orchid bulb suspended in clear preserving medium. The copper plate beneath it read, "Open together." Plant together. Wait together. Sophia lifted it carefully, setting it on the workbench, where light from the setting sun caught the glass. Inside, the bulb looked almost alive, frozen in possibility. Miguel retrieved one final jar, larger than the others, and handed it to me. She asked that you read this one, Mr. Daniel. My hands shook as I broke the seal. The letter inside was longer than all the others combined, multiple pages in Eleanor's handwriting. I had to clear my throat twice before I could begin. My dearest Daniel and Sophia, if you've made it this far, you've already done the hardest part. You've shown up for each other. Now I need to tell you some things I couldn't say when I was alive, because you weren't ready to hear them, and I wasn't strong enough to force you to listen. I paused, steadying my voice. Sophia moved closer, her shoulder against mine. Daniel, I knew my death would freeze you in the pattern you've perfected over our decades together. Avoiding emotion through productivity. You'd build something magnificent and call it grieving. You'd work yourself hollow and call it healing. I watched you do it when your father died, when Sophia left for college, during every loss that mattered. You designed structures to hold everything except your own heart. The words landed like stones in still water. I kept reading. Sophia, my darling girl, I knew you'd flee, not because you're weak, but because you're my daughter. When pain comes, you adapt, you migrate, you find new soil. You'd go to Portland, or Seattle, or anywhere that didn't smell like my absence. You'd build a good life there and call it moving forward, but you'd never come home, and neither would your father, and you'd both be alone together in your separate cities. Sophia's breath caught beside me. I understood you'd need time apart before you could come together. This greenhouse is my final design, not a building, but a relationship structure. Daniel, you taught me that good architecture serves human needs across time, creates space for people to become who they need to be. Sophia, you taught me that sustainable design works with nature, not against it, honors cycles of growth and decay. This garden is both. It will outlive me, but only if you tend it together. I had to stop. The page blurred. Sophia took it gently from my hands and continued reading. The orchid bulb in the terrarium is a hybrid I created during my final year. I cross-pollinated Daniel's favorite species Phalaenopsis with those architectural, precise blooms he loves with Sophia's favorite epidendrum, wild and adaptive and sustainable. I've been cultivating it in secret, preserving it for this moment. It's unnamed. Plant it together. If it blooms, you name it together. It will take 3 years. You'll have to communicate, visit, tend it in turns. That's the point. The bloom is beautiful, but the tending is the gift. I'm giving you a reason to stay connected that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with what we built together. The letter continued with specific planting instructions, soil composition, light requirements. Even in death, Eleanor was teaching. When Sophia finished reading, we sat in silence. Then, somehow, words I'd held for 2 years began to surface. I used work to avoid your dying, I said, voice cracking. I reviewed blueprints during chemo appointments. I took conference calls during your final weeks in hospice. I thought if I built something important enough, it would matter more than losing you. I was wrong. I lost the time we had left, and I can't get it back, and I did. Sophia's hand found mine. I moved to Portland because I couldn't watch you watch her die and pretend it wasn't happening. I abandoned both of you when you needed me most. I told myself I was giving you space, but I was just running. Miguel, who'd been standing quietly by the door, spoke. She knew all of this. Every bit. She told me once, near the end, Miguel, I'm not planting this garden to make them feel guilty. I'm planting it to give them something to do with the guilt, transform it into growth. That's what she said. Transform it into growth. We prepared the central bed, together, architect, environmentalist, Gardner. I measured the space with the precision Eleanor had always gently mocked, calculating optimal placement for light exposure. Sophia mixed the soil, combining sustainable medium with compost from Eleanor's original beds, literal foundation from the past supporting future growth. Miguel's practiced hands guided ours, showing us the ritual of it, the care required. We opened the terrarium together, Sophia's hands and mine on the seal. The orchid bulb felt impossibly light, impossibly heavy. We placed it in the prepared soil, covering it gently, patting the earth firm. I knelt there, hands dirty, for the first time in 2 years. Tears on my face, planting hope I wouldn't see bloom for 3 years. Sophia knelt beside me, shoulder to shoulder, both of us finally present in the same moment. The greenhouse that had been a tomb of avoidance transformed into a living commitment to future connection. As we watered the newly planted orchid, the setting sun hit the glass ceiling at a precise angle. Light fractured into rainbow patterns across the growing beds, painting everything in color. She calculated this, Sophia whispered. The spring equinox, this exact time of day. Look at the angle. I looked up, architect's eye recognizing the mathematics of it. The pitch of the glass, the orientation of the structure, the specific date and hour, all designed to create this moment of refracted light. She built a cathedral for growth, I said. We made our promises official there, kneeling in the soil. Monthly video calls to discuss the orchid's progress. Rotating visits. Sophia would come home quarterly. I'd visit Portland quarterly. We'd plant the year 3 seeds together when Sophia had something to celebrate. I'm finishing my master's thesis, Sophia said, on sustainable memorial gardens. Design that holds space for grief while creating new life. I'd like to contribute architectural drawings, I offered, if you want them. Our first collaboration. I want them, she said. As we left the greenhouse, locking it behind us, the evening had turned cool. Sophia paused at the door. We should come back tomorrow morning. Start planning where the year 3 garden will go. I agreed. For the first time in 2 years, I had a reason to return to the greenhouse, not to confront pain, but to tend promise. Sunday morning, I woke before dawn and found myself walking to the greenhouse without conscious decision. Sophia discovered me there an hour later, photographing the newly planted orchid from different angles, taking measurements of light exposure, sketching in a notebook I'd pulled from the workbench. Can't stop working, huh? She said from the doorway, but her tone was gentle, almost teasing. No, I stopped, looked at what I was doing. Actually, I'm just here, present, for the first time in a long time. I showed her my sketches, rough ideas for expanding the greenhouse, incorporating sustainable ventilation systems she'd mentioned yesterday, passive solar design, rainwater collection. I thought maybe we could collaborate on it, if you're interested. Her smile was Eleanor's smile. I'm interested. Over breakfast, we did something I couldn't have done alone. We looked through Eleanor's photo albums. Sophia pulled them from the coffee table where I'd left them, opened to a picture of the 3 of us in the greenhouse when Sophia was maybe 10 years old, all of us laughing at something outside the frame. She talked about you constantly those final months, Sophia said quietly. When you were at the office or on conference calls, she'd tell me stories about how you'd leave notes in her gardening books, little sketches of flowers you'd seen on job sites, how you'd rearrange your schedule to make her doctor appointments, even though you pretended you hadn't. She wasn't angry you worked so much, Dad. She just wanted you to know you were enough without the work. I had to set down my coffee cup. I'm trying to learn what she was teaching. that growth takes time, that I don't have to build monuments to matter. None of us do, Sophia said. Miguel arrived mid-morning to check on the orchid. As Sophia loaded her car for the drive back to Portland, he gave us each a small cloth packet tied with twine. Seeds from Mrs. Eleanor's original garden, he explained. She wanted pieces of this garden in both your lives. Plant them in your own spaces. Different soil, different climate, but same roots. You have some too, Sophia asked. He nodded, almost shy. I've been planting her designs in my own yard for 2 years now. Small things. A corner of jasmine, some of the memory plants. She drew me diagrams, told me stories about each one. His eyes went distant. She built a garden bigger than this greenhouse, a network across multiple lives. The realization settled over Usseliner's design had never been contained by glass walls. It was distributed, living in Miguel's yard, soon to be in Sophia's Portland apartment, in my own spaces here, a web of growth connecting us across distance. When Sophia and I hugged goodbye, it wasn't the awkward embrace from Friday. This was real, my daughter in my arms, both of us holding on. I'll call you Wednesday, she said. We can video tour the orchid, see how it's settling in. I'd like to see your thesis draft, I offered. If you want feedback, she smiled, pulling back to look at me. Professional or paternal feedback? Both, if that's allowed. It's allowed. We made practical commitments before she left. I wouldn't sell the house. It was no longer a mausoleum, but a living project, a garden that required tending. I'd take on fewer professional projects. One of Eleanor's letters had suggested I mentor young architects instead of building monuments, pass on knowledge instead of constructing legacy. Sophia mentioned she might bring her partner, Marcus, on the next visit. Someone I hadn't met, another bridge to cross. We created a shared digital album on our phones to document the orchid's growth. Proof that some things can't be rushed but are worth waiting for. No dramatic declarations marked the moment. Just Sophia's car pulling away with a return date on the calendar. Just me returning to the greenhouse, not to grieve, but to water. Just the unopened seed packets, 4 years, 3, 5, and 10, sitting in my study, now future appointments with connection. An hour into her drive, my phone buzzed. Sophia's text. Mom would have loved this, I typed back. She designed it. We're just following the blueprint. Monday morning, I returned to my drafting table. Something had shifted. I found myself sketching a memorial garden, concept inspired by Sophia's thesis, by Eleanor's greenhouse, by the understanding that architecture can hold space for grief and growth simultaneously. It was the first project in 2 years that felt like creation rather than escape. 6 months passed like seasons through glass. September arrived with cooler mornings and the kind of light that makes you think about time differently. I was on a video call with Sophia, both of us holding our phones at awkward angles to show our respective plants from Eleanor's seeds. Sophia's had thrived in Portland's wet climate, her jasmine climbing a small trellis on her apartment balcony, blooming enthusiastically. Mine required more careful attention, more frequent watering, adjustments for our drier soil, but they were growing. The orchid still hadn't bloomed. It would take 3 years, just as Eleanor predicted. But there was visible growth, leaves unfurling, strong root structure. When Miguel and I checked it carefully, it was responding well to our collective care. I'd taken over most of the maintenance, learning from Miguel, texting Sophia with questions about soil pH and humidity levels. The greenhouse was no longer a place I avoided. I took my morning coffee there now, read Eleanor's gardening journals, sometimes just sat and watched light move across the growing beds. Dad, I have news, Sophia said through the phone, her face bright with the kind of excitement I hadn't seen in years. I defended my thesis yesterday, cultivating memory, sustainable design for living memorials. I'd attended via video, watched her present our collaborative work, my architectural drawings integrated with her sustainable systems, the greenhouse as case study. Her committee had praised the integration of architectural permanence and ecological adaptation. One professor called it a blueprint for grieving forward. We're planting the year 3 seeds this spring, Sophia said. You and me. Mom's instructions said when Sophia has something to celebrate. I think this counts. It counts, I agreed, feeling pride swell in my chest. Not the old pride of legacy and inheritance, but something warmer, pride in who she'd become, on her own terms. The house had changed too. Sophia's partner, Marcus, had visited over the summer. He'd helped us build raised beds for the year 5 garden, planned for native wildflowers that would support local pollinators. Marcus and I had bonded over design, philosophy, sustainability principles, Eleanor's remarkable foresight. The three of us, Sophia, Marcus, and I, had hosted a small dinner party. The first time I'd had guests in 3 years. My work had shifted as well. I'd taken on 2 mentees, young architects from underfunded programs who reminded me of myself. I was designing a community greenhouse for a nonprofit, my first project that prioritized access over prestige. No wealthy clients, no architectural awards, just space for people to grow things together. Eleanor was right, I told Miguel one afternoon as we worked side by side in the greenhouse. I was building monuments when I should have been building connections. I'd started journaling, writing letters to Eleanor I'd never send. But the practice of articulation was healing in ways I hadn't expected. I was beginning to understand that her elaborate planting wasn't manipulation. It was scaffolding for growth she knew I'd need, structure that could support me when I finally learned to lean on it. The greenhouse had become something like a church. For me, not worshiping the past but honoring it while tending the future. Early October morning, first frost threatening, Miguel and I carefully covered the orchid to protect it through winter. My phone rang. Sophia's morning ritual check-in, the one we'd maintained for 6 months now, without missing a day. "Show me the orchid," she said. I angled the camera to show the covered plant, its protective cloth like a blanket tucked around a sleeping child. 2.5 more years, Sophia said softly. I can wait, I replied, and meant it. I've learned patience tastes better than speed. As I ended the call, I noticed the maple bonsai on the center table. Its leaves were turning crimson, Eleanor's favorite color, the shade she'd worn on our first date. I photographed it, sent it to Sophia with a simple message. She's still teaching us. Her reply came quickly, a heart emoji, then, always. Will be. I stood there in the greenhouse, surrounded by growth in various stages, some plants blooming, some dormant, some still seeds waiting for their appointed time. Through the glass, I could see Miguel working in the garden, the house warm with lights behind him, the world continuing its patient revolution. Some architects leave buildings behind, structures that outlast them, monuments in steel and glass. Eleanor left a garden that required me to grow. She designed a future where love wasn't something I'd lost, but something I was learning to cultivate in new forms. I'm finally ready to bloom on her timeline, not mine. **.